Hi, and welcome to Sexual Alchemy with Dea Carr. Today I have the lovely and wonderful Kate Anthony, who is a divorce coach and the host of her own podcast, The Divorce Survival Guide. Kate, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm so happy to be here talking to you.
I know. I was so inspired when I met you and learned about what you do. So I am thrilled to talk to you about all things divorce related and sexual, which are provocative, certainly topics enough.
Yeah.
There's a lot to cover in that. So could you start by talking a little about your experience and your background and what it is that inspired you to do what you do, if I may ask?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am a divorced mom, a very happily divorced mom. I've been divorced for over 10 years. And I have, I really got into divorce coaching after having, I think, we sort of share this, having been an actor for 30 years and being in LA. And then I got divorced and I was a stay-at-home mom and an actor. I was on a show and I got divorced and I was like, this is definitely not something that's going to continue to support me, continuously in the way that I need to be supported. So I kind of needed a new something. And by the way, when I say I was an actor for 30 years, I'm not ancient. I started on Sesame Street.
Oh my God, amazing. Wow.
Yeah, I always say that I started my career with 5 years on Sesame Street, and then I closed it with 5 years on Grey's Anatomy, and then I was done. So, and to be perfectly honest, also I think that I was in a fairly emotionally abusive marriage, and when I stepped out of that, when I stepped out of being in that victim role, I abandoned all of the abusive relationships in my life, including being an actor in LA, which is an abusive relationship to many. And so I had to reinvent myself. I had to completely recreate myself, and new career, new home, new identity, new everything. And so in thinking about what I wanted to do, one of the things that people kept saying was like, oh, you should be a therapist. And I was like, hell no, I do not want to be a therapist. And eventually someone said, what about coaching? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And coaching was fairly new at the time. And so I went back to school and I got years of training and certification. And I knew that I wanted to help people get through their divorces. That was one of the things. I had a very, very, very volatile marriage, and I had a phenomenal divorce.
Wow.
Phenomenal. Like, we were so...
Hey, that's huge.
Yes, we were so grateful to not be doing this anymore.
It's the right thing, yeah.
We were like, for God's sake, thank God, right?
Yeah.
And so we ended up, being sort of the go-to. Like, everyone was like, how did you do that? How did you go from that to this?
Wow.
And I knew that I wanted to help people figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I ended up doing. And that's what I do. And it's been a long journey. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now. And there's been a long journey and process, but at this point, that is what I do. I help people decide whether they should stay or go. Right. And in that process, I help them heal wounds, take responsibility for what's theirs, release what's not, get really clear on those sort of two ends of the spectrum, heal blame and resentment and shame and all of those things, so that, first of all, if they stay, they can do so with a clean heart and in a very without stuff coming in from the past all the time, right? Actually sort of
yeah. Sorry.
And then if they decide to go, mm-hmm. then they do so again from a place of healed, a place of healing and growth, and not from resentment and anger and bitterness, which is all of the stuff that makes divorce so ugly.
Yeah.
It's people not having processed. You're making the biggest legal and financial decisions of your life in the midst of the greatest emotional upheaval of your life. And it's a terrible combination.
Right.
And so if you can heal the emotional stuff and really work through that before making the decision, or even after making the decision, but before making any legal decisions, everything else will be easier, clearer, and less fraught. And then my job is to protect kids. I don't care. You can be as bitter and angry as you want if you don't have kids. Like, go for it. Go to court, litigate, do all of that. But if you have kids, the litigation system is set up such that they're the pawns.
Sure.
And they're in the middle. And when you heal that stuff in advance, before you start going down any mediation or litigation, you're far less likely to get trapped in the litigation cycle.
Right. Right. Yeah, and what I hear you saying, which I love, is the idea that helping people become conscious of what it is that they have created in this situation themselves is a big thing, right? Because it's so easy to constantly be pointing the finger and saying it's your fault, you didn't do this, you did that, right? But giving people courage to find their own space for responsibility, and then be able to be proactive and not be the victim moving forward, right? So
exactly.
That happened, right? But now what? Now how am I gonna move forward in this?
Right, exactly. And newsflash, even if you're in a terrible relationship, you chose that relationship. So you're probably going to choose it again in a different form.
Healed, right? You're like, repeat the same vibration, attract energetically the same thing because it's a lesson you have to learn, right?
Exactly, 100%. And we see this play out in divorce statistics, by the way. So 50% of first marriages end in divorce. This is, something we know, right? 68% of second marriages also end in divorce. And almost 74% of third marriages also end in divorce, because we're just repeating the patterns over and over and over again. Yeah. And we're not getting better at it.
A very similar partner, right? That's going to mirror
100%
the same lesson.
Exactly. Different form, different body type, different, like all these things that we're like, he's so different. And then at the end of the day, you're like, oh my God, it's the same.
Yeah. How did I not see that?
Right.
Yeah. So do you primarily work with women?
I do. Yeah.
And is that by design?
Yeah, it is by design, and it's something that I've been toying with lately, is whether I should open up to my practice up to men as well. And I'm thinking about it, and I may do that. Yeah. I'm not opposed to it. I think that I worry about the male-female dynamic in that, in that sort of vulnerable space. And so I haven't done it, but I do it all the time in my personal life. But yeah. And
I think that's one thing that we're noticing right now in terms of kind of a popular belief system, that we were taught for so long that divorce was a failure, right? That it had all sorts of stigma attached to it, and that your marriage didn't last forever, that you somehow failed in your life. And I think there is a new consciousness, if I may, coming in with this much more like, look, people are living a lot longer. And when you commit to life with somebody, maybe you didn't really quite understand what you were getting into, and that the marriage or a relationship can have a finish line, just meaning that this time that we had together on this planet was complete, and it doesn't mean that either of us are a failure, right?
100%.
Revolutionary in terms of people healing this old belief wherever it came from, right?
Right. Yes. Well, I think it came from a very ancient notion of marriage, which was, by the way, based on something completely different that we base marriage on now, right?
Exchange, really.
Right? It was business arrangement, it's land holdings, it's all right. And so it's like, yeah, sure, that can last forever, but does, passionate love or, right? Like, that's different. Like, we're basing marriage on a very different set of ideals at this point. Sure. And we have a very old belief system about how long it's supposed to last, and also the other thing about marriage not being a failure, right, is that I don't think my marriage was a failure. I have an amazing child, and I have an amazing relationship. I have a co-parenting relationship with my ex-husband, and a true friendship with him,
Right.
and his wife, by the way.
Beautiful.
That, yeah, and that's a success.
Yeah. And you had an invaluable life lesson that you got to learn about yourself, right? And
Oh,
from.
hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I love to hear that you're empowering another women by your example, by your teachings, by what you're helping them activate in themselves, but realizing that like this does not have to be seen as a failure, that you can then take this as like your biggest growth opportunity and grow from it, and then attract your next relationship that's going to be your next level.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that was, one of the reasons that I ended up leaving my marriage too, was the minute I realized, I thought, my God, who am I to keep him from his happiness? Right. Who am I to keep him? We don't like each other very much. We're not compatible. We bring out the worst in each other.
Right.
There are people out there who will bring out the best in both of us. And who am I to keep him from that? Right. And in a sense, I was keeping him and he was keeping me. But I remember having this very sort of weird thing where it wasn't about me in that moment. It really was about this like shot of generosity to this man that I thought, wow, who am I to hold him back from being his best self, from finding someone that he really does love and want to be with, and who he, and who brings out the best in him, and all of this like stuff. And I had this moment of like, I want that for him. Oh my God, I want that for him.
And that's love.
Yeah.
Really
yeah. And I also wanted it
space to come from.
Yeah. And not really selfishly, but I wanted that for my son. I wanted my son to witness that.
Right.
Not what we had.
Modeling. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing about success and failure, right? Is that we decide that a marriage that has lasted 30, 40 years, till the end of time, is a successful marriage, regardless of how happy those people actually are, right? So we're like, well, they were together.
The road in the process, right?
Oh my God, right? I mean, these poor people who are like utterly miserable, and they've sold their souls to like this marriage vow and whatever it is, right? And if they're utterly miserable, like, is that our definition of success?
Very true. Very true.
Like, no, thank you. I don't want that.
And that's another thing that I try to look at in general too. Like if we measured like our own internal happiness and peace as the definition of success, wouldn't we look at success differently? Right?
100%.
Success to people. What is successful, truly? And that's a very personal thing.
Yes. And they've actually done studies on this, that the pursuit of success makes people unhappy, whereas the pursuit of happiness makes people successful.
Right. Yeah. It's totally different intention, right?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Going back to your point about marriage being, the way that marriage has been set up in many different cultures over the ages as an exchange, often a arranged situation, often some kind of bargaining or bartering tool that women were often married off in these situations between families. And there was often, not romantic love as the inspiration of marriage, right? That's really been a much more modern notion that is why we marry, that we choose our mate out of this, influx of feelings and emotional states that therefore we hope will then continue till all eternity, right? And so there's so many ways that we are fed very unrealistic expectations of what marriage should be. Starting there.
Yes.
But starting with the romantic and the sexual, right? The attraction, what brought the two together, right? The alchemy of the male and the female, or, whatever it is in same-sex marriages, is certainly the same kind of energetic component of whatever draws people together, whatever way that works for people. So ultimately, what is it that you've learned about how sex and sexual energy changes over time in a relationship? Let's start there.
Oh boy, yes. Well, I mean, I think it starts in the beginning, right? We mistake sex for love.
Right.
Especially women, because when we orgasm, we release the bonding hormone oxytocin. And so we literally bond
Yeah.
to this person that we, the way that we do things now, like we don't know this person.
Right. Right.
We don't really know them because, we're out here having sex on like the third or fourth date, like,
Right.
and okay, that's fine. Like I'm all for people having sex when, and having freedom around that. But we also have to be smart about it and understand what happens, especially for women.
Yeah.
That's not love. Good sex is not love. And, I think there's, it's interesting. I'm in a relationship-ish with someone right now that is not sexual,
Okay.
but it's very intimate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm noticing that the feelings are way deeper and way stronger, but also I feel a lot safer. And that I feel like completely free to be myself. I'm not, there's other reasons for that. I've known this person for almost my entire life, but had we crossed over into like the sexual arena, I would be a total mess about this whole thing. Just to be honest, like I would be.
Because the hormones get in the way and then it blurs
everything.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I'm grateful. And by the way, he's the one who's been like, we're not like, for a variety of reasons, not that he doesn't want to, but he's being very intelligent about it, where I was like, I don't care.
Right.
I'm just like, thank you for protecting me from myself, really. So I think there's that, right? We mistake sex for love, and then we marry these people. I mean, I know people who have a lot of my clients got married after 4 months or 3 months or, and I don't think you actually know someone until you've been with them for at least a year.
At least a year.
At least a year.
You can see their whole season of patterns, right?
Exactly. And then you get to really know some
behavior that Christmas, but you never know.
Totally. I mean, it feels good and it's all of these things, right? But like, and then when the honeymoon dies, and I mean, I can't tell you how many people that I've had sex with in my life that I'm like, oh my God, they like was the best sex ever. And then I like slept with them again a few years later and I was like, why did I think that was good sex? And it was the same sex, but this time my head was a little clearer and I wasn't trying to make it something else. Right. So yeah, sex changes over the duration of a relationship. And, that initial spark certainly doesn't continue.
Right.
That, that fiery passion doesn't continue. I mean, you could speak to this certainly more, I think, eloquently and experientially than I could, but, that, I mean, Lord knows at the end of my marriage, we were together for 10 years. We hadn't had sex in 3.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and it's amazing when people open up the conversation, how common that really is.
Oh, absolutely.
That really does become something that's actually quite normal in a marriage that people kind of don't talk about, because I think there's a lot of shame around it, right?
Yep.
There's an expectation that you're supposed to carry on the happy, loving, romantic side of the sexual relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really an interesting phenomenon, that we're basing marriage so often, which, as we know, those of us who've been married, have so many other components. Like this is in so many ways a business relationship, right? Like you have to have so many levels of compatibility.
Yep.
Sex is a small part of that, right? But then what someone said to me, when the sex is good, it's 10% of the marriage. When it's bad, it's 90%.
Right. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
That's a really good way of putting it, because it does put into perspective how important that is in our lives, and how dangerous it is in some ways to base an entire life around a sexual spark that probably can't be maintained for the duration.
I mean, just when we talk about it objectively, it sounds absurd.
Yeah.
Right? It sounds absurd, and yet we all do it, right? Like we all get sucked into that.
You need to be everything, and you need to be the ultimate father and the ultimate caregiver and the ultimate provider and the ultimate,
Yep.
part-time coach and the ultimate, dynamo in the bedroom and the ultimate compassionate and dear best friend and
Yes.
all the other elements. And so I think what's interesting about what we're talking about as modern women is recognizing, like, what are our expectations about divorce, and specifically what are our expectations around sex in marriage. That's the bigger question, right? Because I don't think that's a conversation that's had enough. And then I think people go into marriage with like, well, you expected that, but I expected this. And then the expectations misalign and things start to break down.
Yes.
And
I mean, I think
a lot.
Absolutely. And I think that's true of almost everything in marriage, that we go into marriage in a romantic frame of mind. Mm-hmm. And we don't go into it in a strategic and well thought out communicative frame of mind. I think it's true of sex. I think it's true of money. I think it's true of alcohol, like anything, right? We don't talk through, okay, so how are we going to be with each other when this gets hard? How are we going to be with each other? What is our expectation of how we're going to raise our kids?
That's a huge one.
Like, we don't talk about any of these things, I mean, I always say that, I hate to say this out loud, but I always say kids are marriage killers. I mean, they really are. And sometimes it's the fact that we haven't had sleep in months. Yeah. We're co-sleeping. Now suddenly we've got kids in the marital bed, the place that we used to have sex. And now there are children like lying in it, and we don't talk through all of these things.
Right. And then also once the kids come, you're just playing catch up. Like, you're just constantly feeling like it's all just, the ball is rolling and you're just trying to like not get crushed.
Right. Absolutely. And then
communication breaks down once that happens. Yeah,
exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like, okay, so we're going to expect that. And then how are we going, for a couple of years, life is going to be a little crazy, and sex and intimacy is probably going to take a back seat. And at a certain point, it's important to both of us that we actually create that connection again. How are we going to do that? Right. Or whatever. Right. I think communication in general is lacking in so many relationships. We make so many assumptions about who we are, about who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. But so much of that is, to your point too, is becoming more conscious about knowing ourselves better than we know how to express what it is we want. And
yes,
be able to help bring that out in a partner. And if I may, my experience, certainly women are the communicators, right? We tend to be the ones who often have to draw that out in men.
Yes.
That's something you've noticed.
Yes, it is. And the thing that I notice so much in my practice is I have women coming to me saying, I've been begging him to go to therapy for years and years and years. Right. And he just won't go. Mm-hmm. And then when they finally say, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, then suddenly their husbands are like, wait, I'll go to therapy. Wait, what? I'll do anything. Right. And 9 times out of 10, it's too late at that point. Yeah. So if any men are listening to this, if your wives or girlfriends or anyone, his partner is telling you that they want you to go to therapy, just go the first time. Just as soon as they ask, go.
Because also I think, I wonder if it isn't for men, it feels like an admission of failure. If we're in therapy, then we have to really face the fact that we have trouble, right?
Yes, and absolutely.
We can just kind of like pretend it's not happening, right? Until it all blows up.
Until it all falls apart. And that is the ugly truth of it, is that it really will fall apart. And it's so, I see it time and again. And it's so tragic, because I think a lot of these men are truly blindsided.
Right. And
their wives are like, but I've been saying this for a really long time. Right. But both things are true.
Yeah.
Both things are true. I want to go back, and I want to say something about, we were talking about sort of the history and the evolution of marriage and sort of what it's become, if that's okay.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. That, we started out with marriages being, business arrangements and all of that. Right. And then but that's when we lived in more tribal villages where, multiple people were meeting multiple needs.
It was much more communal. Yes, for
sure. It was a community. It was all communal. And particularly women, we got our emotional, spiritual, psychological, a lot of those needs met by other women living together.
Yeah.
And when we created single family homes and, the white picket fence, which I call our sort of, feminist jail bars, that we isolated ourselves. And then all of a sudden, this one person, the only other adult in the house, had to be all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so now you have to fulfill me spiritually and, psychologically and emotionally and sexually, as you said, all of those things. Right. And it's really screwed us. For lack of a better word.
Yeah, no, and it's because it's we don't even realize it. That's the bigger picture too. It's like it's all happened. It's kind of been insidious, and it's this gradual thing, and then it's just this reality we all adapt to. But we're like, something's lacking, but we can't even quite put a finger on it. And I also think about that a lot in terms of what the expectations of are for women, right? And we're still defining what it means to be a woman who is a mother, a full-time caregiver, as well as have a career or something fulfilling that she's doing for herself, that she's actually using her college degree for, or they're just her God-given brain, and still hold the role of, I want to be able to have a hand in raising my own children. There is just not enough time in the day for us to be all the things that we expect of ourselves and that we have in some ways expected for ourselves in society, right? And so we're still trying to fill in the gap of making sense of this. Mm-hmm. And so many women are feeling they come up lacking. And, statistically, even when both the father and the mother are both working, more often than not, the mother is doing all the extraneous stuff regarding the children in terms of planning and scheduling and school things and all the obligations and all the
mental load
that requires.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
As well as the majority of the housework.
Yep.
And then lo and behold, they're not feeling so sexy, and they don't really, there's enormous resistance.
Wonder why.
I don't know why. And then there's the barriers, it all starts to break down. But that's such a big, I have so much compassion for myself. I will start there, and other women who are struggling with this right now, because I do think still are in this state of feeling like you're supposed to work like you don't have children, and you're supposed to mother like you don't have a job. And either way, you're coming up short, right?
Absolutely.
And so I was talking about this with someone recently, but like in terms of sexual dynamics, there, I was always really kind of grotesquely fascinated by the whole 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon. And I bring this up because it is a little dated at this point, but I think that it speaks to, kind of on a sociological front, the idea that women feel like they have to do everything. Yes. And that there's so much pressure that we are even probably putting on ourselves subconsciously, collectively, that the turn on of a man taking command in that way that was demonstrated in that sexual dynamic, right? That he was, was indicative of the fact that we have had too much control. And so not too much control, but feel so much responsibility that it's overwhelming. And so the idea to surrender sexually to someone who's just got it, was an enormous collective turn on, because I think it surprised people that was such a universal, arousing subject matter. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think I'll also add that had Christian Grey not been a multi-billionaire
in his garage, not so
hot.
Like a bunker, no.
Right, because then it would be a little bit like Psycho. Right.
Well, so a lot of it is kind of psychologically unhealthy,
100%.
Yeah.
100%. But yes, I just, that layer I think is important.
Someone, I know. It's true. And didn't look like that, probably.
Right. The whole Jamie Dornan thing really didn't hurt.
Yeah, probably factored in there.
Yeah.
The point being, it's an interesting kind of time that we're in terms of women in marital relationships, in sexual dynamics, in terms of what it is we're grappling with collectively, what it is we each want, what it is we want from our partner that we can't even say.
Yeah.
And the idea that there is that part of sexuality, of feminine sexuality, that is receptive and wants to surrender. And
Yes,
how do you
because we're
find that?
exhausted.
We're exhausted.
Like we're exhausted. And we're mentally exhausted. Like the mental load is a real thing. And there's a great book by Gemma Hartley called Fed Up that talks about it and really breaks it down so beautifully. And, you know, we are exhausted. And so, yeah, to like come home and have a man just like take control and, you know, do things to us and like make us feel good and sexy and hot, that we don't actually have to do it. Like we don't actually have to bear the mental or physical load of it.
Right.
I think that's I think that's a huge turn on, right? Like, oh, I don't have to go shopping for the clothes. He's going to provide them. Right. He'll put me in the position he wants me in. He'll like, just great.
Right. And then in that dynamic there, barring the violent part of it.
Yes. Yes.
Idea that the woman ultimately, and the feminine energy, is receptive, right? That we want to be able to receive. We want to be able to be soft, and that water element, the moon, be reflective, right?
Yep.
And that, you know, we've been talking about this a lot in this podcast, but really that dynamic of the feminine is powerful, is the definition of powerful. We are the life bearers. We are the nurturers. Unfortunately, our culture, in a patriarchal system that we are still operating under, does not reflect that as powerful, right? It
exactly.
as weak. You're a pussy, you know, that we use that term even, right? That's so often what is feminine is regarded as weak or less than.
Yep.
And so it's a really interesting time to feel empowered as women, because we're dealing with such rocky terrain, right? And then in terms of sexual dynamics in a marriage, how that plays out, right? How that comes into so many different factors. Can you talk about that a little bit? What you see, or if there's a overall message that you've seen kind of that breaking down in relationships?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, oh gosh, you know, it is, I think to be a woman sexually, and to take someone literally inside of you. So it's figurative, it's metaphoric, but it's also literal.
Biologically true.
It's biologically fact. You know, it is such a vulnerable thing for women. And here's the thing, is that I think that most women don't think about it that way.
Yeah.
I don't think I really thought about it until I was in my 40s.
Yeah.
And I'd had a lot of sex by that point, you know. I mean, I had thought about it, right? You think about it sort of intellectually, but I don't think I had actually embraced what that really meant to me.
Energetics exchange.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when we're doing this with people that we don't know very well, like, or we're marrying people and we're doing this, or when dynamics become complex in marriages, when we build up resentments,
right?
And we have resentment, and then this person wants to have sex with us, and then we do it anyway, right? So we build up, you know, how many times as women do we have sex when we don't want to? And the psychological, the sort of the metaphysical scarring of that, you know, the sort of the physical scar tissue, the metaphysical scar tissue that actually is created by having sex that we don't want to have, and we out of obligation. And I think that married women have so much obligation sex, more so than we ever really talk about or admit.
Yeah, that's big.
Right?
Yeah, right. Because that to some degree is a betrayal of self. And that hurts almost more than you know, doing
absolutely,
and you don't want to. It's recognizing I'm not even listening to myself. I'm not honoring my own needs here. I'm not even asking that of you.
Right.
Because I, you know, to some degree it's become blurred in myself.
Absolutely.